Now, Palestinian officials have accused Israeli forces of carrying out a massacre along the Israel-Gaza border fence. 55 protesters were killed and at least 2,500 people were wounded by troops in a day of violent protest. It came as the US opened its embassy in Jerusalem. Joining us for that story and others making the news this morning, Public Affairs consultant Gerard Howlin and Director of the Irish Academy of Public Relations, Gunning. Good morning, Ellen.
Good morning.
You know, we've had the photos and all our and footage on all our news bulletins for the last 12, 24 hours. It is quite extraordinary. Israel's response seems way over the top. And then if you look at the bigger picture, given that this is a tinderbox and has been for my entire lifetime, the opening of that embassy in Jerusalem and the backing by the United States of it seems absolutely and utterly provocative.
What struck me most yesterday, watching all of the visuals, was that this is a propaganda coup for the Palestinians. And I don't mean that in a negative way, just look at the visuals. You have, on one side, you have Palestinians who are against a wall, who are using rocks and burning tires. And on the other side, the visual is of the Israelis.
Best equipped army in the world.
Airstrikes, live ammunition and tear gas. There's no measure in the response at all. And then the other visual on the Israeli-American side was of people celebrating the opening of a new embassy. And they were very happy and they looked very smug. That really struck me from the visuals. And then last night, when they knew, I think there were 50, certainly in excess of 50 confirmed dead, and they were talking about 2,000 injured. There was a rocket display, and they went ahead with it. They went ahead with the celebration when in excess of 50 people had died less than 50 miles from where the embassy was opened. And I just found myself thinking, if I was a Palestinian, I would think, I have now brought the attention of the world to my cause. And if I was an American, I would be thinking, damn it, this was supposed to be a celebration of our decision to move to Jerusalem, and it has become what on earth is happening to the Palestinians?
That may very well be true, Gerard, but we've all been aware of how badly treated the Palestinians have been for generations now, and their situation hasn't improved. In fact, if anything, it's gotten worse.
No, I mean, they talk of the NAPCA, the catastrophe, that's now 70 years old and coincides with the foundation under a United Nations mandate of the State of Israel. But they've also, of course, been extremely badly led. And this protest, ending as it did yesterday, and tragically, Mark, is going to continue today.
It's utterly predictable.
It's utterly predictable. It's planned by Hamas. You know, Hamas is in control of the Gaza Strip. There haven't been elections there for years. And when they did take control, they got rid of Fatah by means of mass execution. People talk of the blockade of Gaza, but everything that goes into Gaza goes in through Israel, because the Egyptians on the other side have a complete blockade that allows nothing in, and international money that goes to the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank in turn is not forwarded on to Gaza. So the plight of the people in Gaza is multifaceted. It's real. It is an open-air prison. But I was at that wall just a year and a half ago. And on the other side of the wall, which, as Ellen said, is just over 50 miles from Jerusalem, are bus shelters where children and people are going to school and going to work. And those bus shelters are bomb shelters because rockets continuously rain over from the other side, because tunnels are continuously built underneath. And if that wall is breached, the State of Israel effectively ceases to exist. Don't forget that context, how geographically tiny the area is we speak of. I don't think when we're looking at this map on television, we grasp how really small and intimate these physical spaces are. And we're talking about the right of return. But the right of return of millions of Palestinians who in their lives and in their parents' lives never lived inside Israel proper would effectively completely extinguish the State of Israel. And in turn, within Israel, the majority of people come from Jewish communities in Iran, Iraq, in Egypt, across North Africa, that were brutally expelled on the foundation of the State of Israel in the late 40s and early 50s. And they say, what return? What right is there to return for us to Baghdad or to Cairo to reclaim our livelihoods, our homes, and to visit the graves of our relatives. So there has been mass displacement of populations on both sides, and the right of return, which is effectively, as organised by Hamas up to this wall yesterday, is a war of return. Because until there is a recognition on the Palestinian side that within Israel proper, as distinct from the West Bank, there will be no return, then there will be no peace, because there cannot be a peace that does not give Israel security.
It's a very long and complex history, which has a distinct resonance, has a very strong resonance for us here, because you're talking about people being displaced, people being settled or planted, as we call it in our history, and we saw how long that took. So what are they going to have to wait 700 years before they get it sorted out?
This right of return has all the logic of saying that the people planted in Ulster in the 17th century should be returned to Scotland.
OK, let's move to the HSE. Structural reform is going to be considered by the Cabinet. Board restoration, management reviews to be part of a plan to rebuild public confidence. Helen, how do you dismantle the HSE and rebuild it, make it fit for purpose, and all the while maintain the services that it's supposed to provide?
It's almost impossible, isn't it? The HSE, I think, is a failed entity from the time it was first created, because it was all of these boards who were brought together. There was no structure. It was, we are now going to operate under one entity, but the same number of people were still employed, the same jobs, the people kept at the same levels. At that point, there was no decision that we need a proper structure.
We've known that for a decade.
Exactly.
Or more. But it's hit the buffers now, and they can't let that go on any longer. Something has to be done.
It has to be done. And the interesting thing is the government are talking about bringing back a board to govern the HSE, so that they can have some sort of governance, some sort of accountability, somebody actually watching that things are done as they should be done. And interestingly, in the article this morning in the Irish Times, I think, they were talking about this board will be responsible for reviewing the structure of the HSE, who's at what level, what are they actually skilled to do? What are they required to do? Are they doing their jobs? I think it needs a change in, not only in mindset, I think it probably needs a change in legislation. I think one of the things that really annoyed people was the fact that Tony O'Brien was allowed to resign. Now, I understand that if they didn't go through due process, it would have cost the government millions. But I think really, if they're going to seek to restructure the HSE, they have to do what you and I would do. If we don't do our jobs, we get fired. I think they need to change the culture and say, this is what needs to be done, this is the structure, and if you don't deliver, you won't be employed.
Gerard, this problem didn't happen today or yesterday, and I'm sure it was there when you were in government as well.
It was, and by the way, if we seriously think that this is confined just to cervical cancer and there aren't other issues about accountability and transparency in the health service, we are delusional.
Well, that's the
this
real.
Cannot be
that
a
is actually the that's the terrifying, the appalling vista, which is that this is actually the tip of an iceberg, and that it's much worse.
Indeed, and you know, it goes down to hospitals where medics are in no way managed by so-called managers. I heard a story yesterday of a manager in a very, very big hospital asking a named consultant, what their holiday plans were, because, you know, these things need to be managed, to which the response was, that's none of your business. It's scary stuff. But looking at the bigger picture, I mean, this has been spun by government as a major reform. It's simply putting back in place what was abolished by James Riley in 2011, which is a basic condition of running any organisation, which is a board. So it's not a major reform. It's just wiping out a bad mistake that's years old.
Okay,
and the board has to be part of that major reform.
I accept that.
Yeah, well, and a culture has to change. But the thing is that it takes decades to change a culture, and no government gets decades in for, even if they had the will to do it in the first place. Okay, listen, thank you both very much indeed.